It's Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m. in Switzerland, and it's Space Café Web Talk time. Our Space Café Web Talk, 33 minutes with Dr. Mathias Link, will begin soon. Thanks for joining for our talk today about why space resources will be driving the future of space exploration. As always, we appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. And even so, we are today in the virtual environment. It was a pleasure last week to do a Space Café live, but there will be times that we will have the chance again. I'm Torsten Kriening, your host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. Our latest episode, published today, this morning, features Stuart Bain of North Star Earth and Space on topics like the COP26 results and space environment. And for all our fans of audio content, we have new episodes in the Space Café Radio, where we talk with interesting people on the road, on shows and on conferences. The latest radio were released yesterday, interviews with Ibrahim Atta of Rocket Factory Augsburg, or Robert Wild, one of the analog astronauts from the Amadee 20 team. We also keep our fan shop open online for you to support us actively and become a space watcher. By getting you a t-shirt, you help us to continue our work, and you mark yourself as a real space watcher. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and later on YouTube. So, I met my guest today about 4 years ago. More or less on that date, I think it was 28th of November, at the meeting of the Hague International Space Resources Governance Working Group. And we've been both members, me being part of the PT scientists aiming for the moon, and Mathias representing the Luxembourg government with their really broad vision for the future. And since then, a lot has happened that we will talk about today. And with that, a very warm welcome, Dr. Mathias Link, in our show. So let me introduce our Mathias to our audience that you does not know. So Mathias is the director of ESRIC, that is the European Space Resources Innovation Center, and that's the newly founded center we will talk about later. And he is really recognized as an expert in the field of space resources, currently holding also the position as Director of International Affairs and SpaceResources.lu at the Luxembourg Space Agency. He works on the definition and implementation of Luxembourg's space sector policy with a focus on international affairs, legal and regulatory issues, research as well as finance. And for more than 10 years, Mathias has represented Luxembourg in the space-related boards of the European Union and ESA, as well as UN COPIUS. And before joining the public sector, he held positions at the management consulting company Booz Allen Hamilton, at Siemens and Philips. So he holds a PhD in applied physics from the Université de Lorraine in France, and a master degree from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, EPFL. So that's it. So Mathias, welcome to our Space Café today. I mentioned where we first met, but maybe you can give us a brief historical overview on how and why Luxembourg found its interest in space resources.
Yes, sure. First of all, thank you very much, Torsten, for inviting me to your Space Café. It's a great pleasure. And also, thank you very much for the kind introduction. So indeed, as you mentioned, Luxembourg actually was active in space already since the 1980s. We started in commercial satellite communications with the creation of SES. And the space sector grew over time in Luxembourg and became what it is today, actually a very important sector in Luxembourg. And this sector is also recognized as one of the key priorities for diversification of our economy. From the government side, we started looking into space resources approximately 10 years ago. At that time, the topic was, of course, already being addressed, but globally very much ignored. It was really a niche. And we, more or less by chance, we started looking into this and saw that this was actually very promising. Obviously, space resource utilization, meaning using different resources like water, gases, metals, but also regolith directly in space, in situ, brings a lot of different applications. On one side, you can use them for future human exploration to go deeper into our solar system, to support astronauts, to produce propellant or to produce infrastructure for those astronauts. But it actually also lays the foundation for a future in-space economy with also very different applications, for example, in in-orbit servicing, in-orbit manufacturing, or refueling of satellites. So overall, there's a huge potential, and we recognized that potential in Luxembourg and started investigating it. And that led then to the launch of the SpaceResources.lu initiative more or less 6 years ago in February 2016, where we gave ourselves the objective to contribute to the peaceful exploration and sustainable utilization of space resources for the benefit of humankind. And since then, we have really implemented a lot of different activities on many different aspects and layers. To give a few examples, on the international level, of course, we have partnered with our European partners at the European Space Agency and also the European Union, trying to start cooperating, also addressing specifically this topic. But also worldwide, we became active at the United Nations. We signed agreements with various countries, for example, the US, China, Japan, the Emirates, all specifically addressing this topic and the huge potential that it holds. Then, you know, it's, on the legal and regulatory challenge, you mentioned the Hague Working Group. We also became active by saying, okay, we need to progress step by step. So we adopted a national law in 2017, recognizing the possibility of resources ownership, but also laying down a complete framework for the authorization and supervision of corresponding missions. And from the start, we recognized that actually that, of course, dealing with this only on a national level is not enough. So we started engaging with other countries at the level of the United Nations. And of course, also there we saw a lot of progress in recent years. But also in between this national level and the very formal UN level, we became active, for example, in the Hague Space Resource Governance Working Group, which is really a very, very good group with nice results that I hope can also be used then in more formal settings. Then, of course, we try to also focus on research, public research and education, which is important to, for example, to develop the right talents to work on this field. We launched a new Space Master program at our university in Luxembourg that also includes courses on space resource utilization. We have started working with companies, funding R&D activities through our national and different ESA programs. And then last but not least, we also try to bring in private investors to see, okay, how can we develop instruments to involve them and be able to support private companies. And on the other extreme, we also signed an agreement with the European Investment Bank to see, okay, how can we use their different instruments to support in the end this new industry. So lots of developments in Luxembourg. We don't have time to go into all the details here, but at the same time, of course, lots of developments also worldwide. And I think the past years have shown that this is really progressing extremely fast.
That's one reason that we are already on episode number 85 with our Space Cafés. So, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. But I would like to to try to dive into a few of the topics you mentioned. And I agree, we can't talk in detail about all of them. But what have been the challenges of to get the idea into actionable tasks? So you had this broad vision, and I'm quite sure they're technical, they're financial, and of course you mentioned regulatory ones. So maybe you want to give us an insight on that.
Yes, indeed. You just mentioned it. There are a lot of different challenges. And so you have the technical challenge, the regulatory one, the financial challenge. And of course, you have the overall challenge that all these individual challenges are very much interlinked. They are all very much related. You will, of course, not find an investor investing in markets that do not exist, with unclear legal issues and with immature technology. So our approach overall has been to address all these challenges in parallel and try to progress step by step. If you ask me, I think the main challenge is that we want to develop sustainable activities in cooperation with the private sector. And the difficulty here is, of course, that we very often try to address markets that do not yet exist. So I think our role as governments and as agencies is to somehow try to find a bridging phase to play the role of anchor customers or early risk takers to support the private industry. And more specifically, what we have tried in Luxembourg is to look for companies that share this long-term vision that we also have, but that also have ideas on proposing near-term business models addressing existing markets in space and on Earth. And there are a lot of examples that I could give, but for example, just before summer, we signed a cooperation with the company Air Liquide, who is of course active in space, but who is predominantly active on Earth in the gas sector. And this is a good example on how to bring in also terrestrial companies into this new sector.
I think what you just mentioned, we see more and more that companies doing something for space, but also have their business on Earth for whatever they develop. I mean, over the last years, you attracted the who is who of space companies in Luxembourg. Not all of them are made it, but most, I think, are still in Luxembourg and grow there. So there seems to be a reason for that, and that can't just be only money. Yeah. So I mean, that seems to be the framework what fits in the heart of Europe. So what are the initiatives and programs you are running today? Maybe you can go now a bit deeper into that.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. It's not all about money. I think it's about the overall approach that you take towards commercial space. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have started in commercial space in Luxembourg. So we have always taken this very much commercial-oriented approach to developing our space sector. And what we have done now in more recent years is to try to take really a broad and more comprehensive view on the ecosystem that is needed for those companies to become successful. And again, there are many different instruments, but for example, one is to have indeed a very clear legal framework. And we developed a specific one in 2017 on space resources. I think that was also somehow to show, to provide more assurance to the different companies and investors in that field that we are really serious about it. But more importantly, I think we adopted a general space law in 2020 that gives a very clear framework now for authorization and supervision of space missions. Of course, we try also to use all the different instruments and programs from ESA to support our industry. But on top of that, we have a very successful national program that allows us to fund R&D activities with companies. It's called Lux Impulse. And then, of course, there's a lot about promotion as well. We have been very active on an international level, trying to sign partnerships with other countries, and also, of course, be present at events like the IAC a few weeks ago, or just last week at the Space Tech Expo in Bremen. So all this is also important for companies that see an agency that is really being active in supporting them. And then last but not least, of course, finance is important, money is important here. And what we try here is really to come up with new instruments to also involve private sectors. I mentioned our cooperation with EIB, that's more the public side, but we also more recently closed the Orbital Ventures Fund, which is an early stage venture capital fund that will be able to invest in early stage startups, and where we also invested as a government, but the majority investors are from the private sector here.
Got it.
So lots of different instruments that we provide to the companies.
I mean, You mentioned the presence of Luxembourg at the SpaceX Expo in Bremen last week, and it was really impressive to see the number of companies that are in this very small, relatively small booth. So that was cool, and it was of course a nice backdrop for our promotion. But I would like to take a question from Mark because it fits very nicely. So he asked, what are the level of administration and supervision of space activities? I assume you give as a government, or you conduct as a government.
Well, we are very close to our companies. That's maybe the advantage of being in a small country. So we know them very well. The sector is, in absolute terms, quite small, even if in relative terms it is large. And of course, when we then also authorize space activities, that means that we know the companies where we authorize different missions, and we really try then to be very regularly in touch with them and see how they develop.
Okay, so our talk is, our talk's theme is why space resources will be the driving for the future of space exploration, and that's, I would say, a bold statement in its own. Maybe let's talk about your new current position as a director of the ESRIC. So what is the goal of that center and how is it set up?
Yes, Azerik is an initiative that we took together with the European Space Agency, in the end responding to both our national strategy, SpaceResources.lu, and to the ESA strategy on space resources, which was published in May 2019. And I always recall that this is actually the first major space agency that published a dedicated strategy on space resources. So what we aim with ESRIC is to create a new internationally recognized center of expertise for both scientific and technical aspects, but also business and economic aspects related to the use of space resources. And of course, we do this again to go further in human and robotic exploration, but also to lay the grounds for future in-space economy. And on the Luxembourg side, we partnered with the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, which is a leading applied research center in Luxembourg. And globally speaking, now with ESRIC, we try to be active in four main pillars. The most important one, I would say, is the research pillar, where we will start research activities all along the value chain of space resources. So really going from the prospection of resources to the mining and beneficiation of these resources, and then to the processing and manufacturing of these resources into viable applications. And to do this, we have also very strong support from ESA, who is bringing dedicated demonstrators, technology demonstrators to ESRIC, and also in the next 2 years, a dirty thermal vacuum chamber that will allow to recreate the lunar environment here in Luxembourg in ESRIC. And in the end, what we want to do is really demonstrate the whole value chain and come to a sort of pilot plant that we can then demonstrate before then doing the same on the moon. And of course, we try again to do this very much in partnership with other research centers and other agencies, but also private companies. We just signed also an agreement with Airbus at the ISC, who will also contribute to this chain. And then the second pillar of ESRIC is the business one. Again, we really try to push commercial partnerships here, but more specifically also we have launched a support program for startups. We can maybe address it a bit later. That will also specifically support the startups. And then what we want to really give as a role to ESRIC is a sort of platform to bring together the community in Europe, because we know that there are many players that are active in this field, but what is missing is more opportunities to bring them together, to exchange ideas and to come up with new projects. And another fourth pillar that goes a bit hand in hand with that is the knowledge management pillar, where we try to build up a central platform together to structure and to make the knowledge available that exists, of course, in ESRIC, but also in Europe more globally, and then also internationally, because again, what we have seen is the really rapid growth of this field, and we need to make sure that Europe keeps up with this rapid pace.
That's right. That's right. We will talk about these three pillars in a bit. I would like to pick Chris Johnson's excellent question about the chicken and the egg. So, what industry will develop first, the asteroid resources or lunar resources? And how will these industry be different? Any thoughts on that?
Yes,
you mentioned the moon already.
Yeah, we made a lot of studies on this, and one very detailed study in 2018, and the result was very clear. I think the moon has a lot of advantages in being more accessible, also having a lot of interest in recent years. So it is pretty clear that the first space resource utilization, or let's say the larger utilization, will be on the moon. And from there, of course, also then benefiting maybe activities in low Earth orbit or Earth orbit in general, and then serving as a stepping stone towards Mars. But then indeed, asteroids resources were addressed actually a lot when we started the initiative, with some prominent examples also in the US. I think the time was not ripe for those companies, but of course asteroids also have a lot of advantages and they will stay. And so we think that after the moon, maybe as a next big step, we will also address asteroids.
Great, thank you. And on that note, I'd like to say a few words. Chris Johnson and the team behind the Open Lunar Foundation does a great job in keeping this dialogue open in the Moon Dialogues about governance systems for the moon and what to do and what not to do. So great job, Chris, on that. Kudos. Mathias, you talked about this quite impressive list of current partners that you have. So what are their goals? Or, I mean, Air Liquide, I think their space business is a fraction of their current business. But are they seeing really this huge potential, this trillion-dollar company?
Yes, well, I never speak about these $1 trillion. I'm not so sure about that number, but there's definitely a market that is developing. This is very clear. I think it's very hard to give numbers, and usually really I avoid giving numbers, but the trend is certainly here. And whether this is happening in 5 or 10 years or even 15, that's indeed very hard to say how rapidly it will evolve. But I think what we see overall in high-tech and technology developments, also in other sectors, is that everything moves much, much faster than we actually think. So I think the trend, again, is very clear. And companies like, for example, Air Liquide have definitely seen this. And what they also see is that you need to partner. You cannot do this alone. You have to bring in the benefits from and the competencies from different companies and also public actors. And that's exactly what we try to do with Azerik, is not to do everything ourselves, but to put in place the different building blocks coming from different entities. And Air Liquide is a good example, but I mentioned also Airbus. We're also in touch with many other smaller companies, both in Luxembourg and in Europe, where we hope to also then enter into partnerships in the coming years.
Cool. Another thing that you mentioned earlier, this community thinking. And I mean, a few years ago, we started with our programs to build a community with SpaceWatch and with the Space Cafés. And many of the people we can welcome here in our audience are really regular visitor to the program. So community is very strong, even so we are still having this nerd factor with all we do. Yeah. So a community now for space resource sounds awesome. So, but how will you grow that? So just pumping money in and saying, "Hey guys, come over," or I mean, I think there's more behind it. I'm quite sure there's more.
Yeah, first of all, you're indeed doing a great job, Torsten, with your team, and congratulations for growing that community more generally around space. I also regularly read your articles, so it's really interesting. Now, specifically for space resources, I would say what we are doing is trying to increase more and more, indeed, the level of recognition for this. Let's say the level it's taking seriously, because I agree with you. When you hear this for the first time, and you're not into it, it sounds a bit like science fiction, but that has has changed so much. I think it's all about taking the time to explaining. And of course, we are very active with the general public, with the media, with politicians to really explain the opportunities that are linked to space resource utilization. So that's one thing, trying to just generally increase the knowledge, and by that also bringing in people and companies maybe that did not think about this as a future opportunity. And then more specifically for the experts, one very important activity we have is the Luxembourg Space Resource Week, which has developed over the past years into being, I think, the largest event worldwide fully dedicated to space resource utilization. It's actually a full week that we organize in Luxembourg once per year around space resources, covering general topics, policy topics, legal and regulatory ones, but then a lot on science, technology, but also business and economic aspects. And we do this together with the European Space Agency. And more generally, we put a specific focus on bringing in the non-space industry. And I'm really proud that we managed to have, for example, big oil and gas companies and mining companies being present at our event. Of course, it is still a bit under the radar. They are not very visible, but they are there, they are participating, and the number keeps growing from year to year. So again, you clearly see a trend here. And so we will organize the next edition next year in May 2022. And of course, you're all very much invited to attend this.
Wonderful. Yeah, as soon as we have a date, I'm quite sure we will do it.
3rd of May.
Okay.
Indeed.
Cool. I mean, the third pillar you talked about was the startup programs that you run in this center, and that sounds very, very interesting. So what is that about? And spoiler alert, what's in the pipeline for tomorrow? So
yes, indeed. So that's a key pillar also of Azerik, because we didn't want to focus only on research. We really want to also help develop further companies in this field. So we launched the Azerik Startup Program at the ISC a few weeks ago. The aim of that program, which is actually the world's first fully dedicated to space resources companies, is to work in 3 phases. So there will be a first phase, which is more about mentoring, bringing in teams, 5 teams per call that will receive both business and technical advice from the partners of Azerik. So most importantly, of course, ESA and LIST, but then also the Technoport with its business network, to help the startups further develop their idea, their business idea, their business plan. And then the idea is to take the best of these 5 startups to a second phase, which is an incubation phase in Luxembourg, with, of course, offices and everything you need, and with 200,000 euros of an initial grant to help develop the team. But of course, more importantly, also with advice on how to go for further funding, both from public and private partners. And then there's a third phase after that second phase of incubation that we call residency, where the startups that are actually very close to the researchers of Azerik will also have the opportunity to stay at Azerik for a longer time. And indeed, yes, we will launch that program. We launched it at ISC, and the first call of the program is opening tomorrow at the New Space Europe conference in Luxembourg, where we'll also have a dedicated session to give more details on this first call.
Cool. Sounds exciting. And I know these questions will be in the chat already or will be coming. What about outside Europe? Are the startup programs open just for European, for Luxembourgish companies, global companies? Is there any hurdle? I mean, Jason asked how it is possible to apply as a Canadian or for a job in Luxembourg as a non-EU member. So Canada as non-EU, obviously non-EU member. So
yeah, so very, very quickly, but on the startup support program for the first phase, there's no limitation at all. You can apply from wherever in the world you are. And part of the program can certainly also be dealt with online. So you don't necessarily need to move to Luxembourg for the first phase. For the second phase, it's different because their funding will be involved. And we expect the company then to also incorporate in Luxembourg. But more generally, I don't think it's an issue if you come from outside Europe. I think Luxembourg is a very open country, And we have many different nationalities here, also from outside Europe.
Okay, so maybe we can give, or you can give us a quick insight in the on the tomorrow's New Space conference. I mean, we have seen the pictures already, I think on LinkedIn and other social media. With this, I think it's a new venue this year, isn't it? Or was it there?
Yeah, it's indeed a new venue. Yeah.
It looks
we try
awesome,
to change.
Yeah, so
yeah, thank you.
What can we expect, and how can we all attend, which are not coming over to Luxembourg?
Yeah, so this is actually the other yearly event that we organize as the Luxembourg Space Agency, which is focused completely on new space, and in particular space applications and the new space economy. Tomorrow we will have sessions on connectivity, on mobility, but also on space debris and space safety. That's a very important topic. But more generally, yeah, we try to discuss about the rapidly growing space industry. We'll have keynotes from our minister, but also from the ESA Director General, Josef Aschbacher, who will be there, and also SES CEO Steve Koller. And the whole event is developed in partnership with the Financial Times. We have currently 200 registrations on site, and that's closed also for COVID reasons. We cannot have more people on site. But we have, I think, more than 400 or 450 registrations online, and it is still possible to register for the online participation. And we have actually also a code that you can use to register for free. Maybe I can put it in the chat.
We will. I put it in our thank you email, that goes out to all the attendees. And if you just send it over to me or to us, and then we will get it out.
Very good.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. I think 32. So we are absolute on time. There are a number of more questions which are quite specific and would divert us a bit from where we are about satellite development. Ramesh, I think that's here. Totally on space resources. Mark asked how to bridge the gap between coal and space mining. I don't know if you want to give a short answer on that.
Yeah, I think we addressed it a bit. So that's indeed a very important aspect for us. We tried it from the start of our initiative to also get in touch with the existing terrestrial industries, mining industry, but also oil and gas industry. And of course start discussions with them and bring them in. And we, as I mentioned before, we had them at our Space Resource Week, and obviously we will continue to do this because there are, of course, obvious similarities between the future space resource utilization industry and the resources industry on Earth. And of course, what we will try to do is to bring in the positive things, let's say, from experiences from the terrestrial industries also towards space, and avoid doing the same mistakes again that we did maybe sometimes on Earth.
Did we make mistakes on Earth? I haven't
sometimes
seen any. No, but as you said, I was very impressed. I think it was 2 years or 3 years ago in the Space Resources Week to see Total, and I'm just mentioning them here, when they described how they discover or evaluate an area, and I mean, yeah, you just take it off Earth, and then you have the same methods. We are not having to reinvent again. So these guys know what they do, and that for I think 100 years plus minus. Maybe minus. So
absolutely. So we need to use the experience here for sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm afraid we have to come to an end, but I'm quite sure we will stay in contact and we'll get your input from time to time. And so then let's see. Before we finish, do not miss our lineup for the next days and weeks. So on Thursday, we have another Space Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland and his guests Joanne Wheeler and Ram Jakku. And that is definitely an event you shouldn't miss, because we will talk about the current ASAT test of Russia and also education in the space environment, as Joanne and Ram are professors and have a heart for that. On the 25th in the afternoon, or at noontime GMT, we have a lunch at Learn by Powering Space, talking about space outreach. And on the 30th, I will talk with Johanna Bergström-Ross from Kiruna about their current status in Kiruna. So we look at your table, Renee, what you guys are doing. On the 3rd of December, the next Space Café Canada by Dr. Jessica West will come up. And then on the 7th, we will stay in the north. And I have the chance to speak with Christian Haugli Hansen, the director of the Norwegian Space Agency. 2 days later, we have another Space Café Moribus Vox Populi, and on the 14th of December, we will have our last 33-minute Space Café this year. And if everything goes well, we will do it live again from the World Satellite Business Week in Paris with the CEO of Euroconsult, Pacôme Rebellion. So all events are going to be online on Eventbrite, and as always, we would like to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletters, and if you like to treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us. Take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.SpaceWatch.Global. Thank you very much, Mathias, for this inspiring talk and being my guest. Thanks to the entire team behind the scenes for doing their great job week by week again. And I hope you all will stay safe, stay healthy these days. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next week. In the meantime, visit our web shop and follow us on social media. But don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much.